Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the SNL Stats podcast. My name is John Schneider, back with you in this off week for a very special podcast called SNL by the Numbers. Before I get to tonight's show, if you haven't checked out last week's panel, we covered everything there was to cover about the post-election craziness, as well as Dave Chappelle performing the longest monologue of all time. And it was a really fun show. Make sure to give it a listen. It is available now on our YouTube page and podcast feed. That show is with John Trumbull from the SNL Nerds podcast, Zach Vasquez, who writes about SNL for The Guardian, superfan Andrew Haskell, who is a moderator on the Live from New York subreddit, and our resident Nostradamus, Sammy K. They all joined us, and it was a lot of fun, our biggest panel we've done so far. And now on to tonight's show. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the podcast the creator of the SNL In Review Experience and SNL writer for Entertainment Weekly and Vulture, Andy Hoglund. How are you doing without SNL this week?
Well, I'm a little bit more well rested than I have been the past 6 weeks, but I missed the show. It's like Stockholm syndrome, you know?
Yeah, I sent out a tweet on Saturday. I said, is Saturday really a Saturday if there's no new SNL? Like, it just didn't feel right.
No, it's just like any other day of the week, you know? And in 2020, that's not a good thing. All the days blur together.
Yeah, exactly. So hoping we get some new SNL soon. We'll talk about that, I guess, at the end of the show. But now I am excited to bring this guy in. He developed a very interesting formula for ranking all of the cast members, and I figured that is perfect for the SNL Stats podcast. So our new stats guru, Mike Murray, how are you? And welcome to the podcast.
I'm good, John. Thanks for having me. Good to meet you, Andy.
Yeah, likewise, Mike.
So, Mike, I really, I want to focus this podcast on the numbers. We're going to get into all the statistics, but first, I want to hear about your background. Tell me a little bit about how you got into stats and why you're so interested in them.
I think, like anyone else, like you get into sports when you're a kid, and I just always followed sports, and numbers never lie. So, I always like to try to create like new stats that you can't find anywhere else, and so you kind of just take it all and see what you find. Sometimes it confirms what you think. Sometimes it, you're actually wrong about something.
Yeah, that's true. And I can definitely relate. But, if people were to check out your Twitter, Mike, I know they could see you do some stats for sports as well. So just tell everybody a little bit about, the type of stats that you cover and how you kind of get to this, to all the numbers that you find.
I guess it's just a lot of like logging stuff. So I do a lot on Tom Brady, the GOAT. So I do like, every touchdown that he does. So I do like a compilation of every new receiver that he'll add to his, fabled list. And just general things, and but just a lot of historical based stats on my Twitter, and Reddit as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think I saw this week that Tom Brady is the player with the most fantasy points of any football player ever. I don't know if you saw that.
Oh, like cumulative?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's like the all-time scoring leader for fantasy sports. But anyways, that's another podcast. We're going to talk a little bit more about SNL. So Mike, give us your background with SNL. How did you get into the show? How did you fall in love with it? And tell us a little about your history with SNL.
Well, I mean, I think like everybody else, like it has like a magnetism to it because it's live. You don't know what's going to happen. You're a kid, you get to stay up, just watch, see what happens. And I was just always like the idea that anything could happen, but also anything could happen with the cast members. So to relate it back to sports, not everything, but like some people on the show will become like superstars and some people you'll just never see again. So only way that you're on the ground floor is if you watch all the time. So it's kind of like a farm system, for movie stars. If you watch Adam Sandler on SNL, then he becomes this, box office celebrity, then it's cool.
I love that analogy. I think that's really apt, actually. And I think what you do, it's like you're applying like a Bill James sabermetric type approach to SNL. It's very cool.
Right. Yeah. What I said earlier, like I wanted to find something that no one else was doing and try to make it totally objective and fair and, carry over.
Yeah. And Andy, that's been a big theme of the podcasts we've done over the last few weeks. I've had a variety of opinions, people coming on and telling me, I love this sketch, or I really, this one didn't do it for me, because, comedy is so subjective, and we're really trying to figure out with somebody like Mike, how do we measure success on the show? And then for, anyone who works at SNL, they kind of want to start to figure out, what is their future like? This is the farm system. This is the AAA of comedy. And then, is there something they can do while they're on SNL so that when they get off of the show, they end up having a lot of success? And my hope is that through this conversation with Mike, we can kind of, start cracking down some of those answers. And as we go through the podcast over the year, continue to develop those answers.
Yeah, I mean, and this is, and I'm not just trying to blow smoke, but SNL is kind of the perfect show for this sort of model, because you do have, 45 years of history of different sketches, different cast members, different guest appearances that really kind of say something like larger about American culture, I guess. So, being able to use a benchmark like these numbers do, and these statistics, I think, illuminate or tell a greater story about the show and about American life, which is kind of fun. So well done.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're listening or watching our show, this is the perfect show for you if you're interested in those numbers and you're a little bit of a stats geek or stats nerd. And if you're not, we're going to try and break things down for you in an easy and simple way to understand them. What I've been doing over the last few weeks on our regular panels is been doing a short segment where I've been bringing up Mike's rankings and explaining, who was the top, who were the top cast members for the week and who maybe didn't do so well during that week due to Mike's rankings, or based on Mike's rankings. So now I want to kind of get a little bit deeper and go into the methodology behind those rankings. So Mike, tell me how you came up with this system to how to rank the SNL cast members.
Sure. It sounds crazy and confusing, but when you look at the numbers, but it's actually really simple. Actually, when I was a kid, I would like write down long form, like who I would see, because I always like to memorize all the cast, and like from the beginning I would memorize the cast, and so I just would write down who appeared in the show, and then I kind of realized, I'm like, this is fun, this is cool, but it doesn't really give you the full picture, because you see Colin Quinn or Norm Macdonald appears like once, and then someone else appears like 6 times, but you feel like you barely saw them. So I started to do screen time and kind of made my own constitution of the rules of how I keep it. And basically what the method is I just do a weighted average of the screen time and the appearances. And the appearances I just rank in 4 different ways, then just blend them together, and then you get one score.
Okay, so let's dive a little bit deeper so people can really figure it out. So it's basically you're looking at 2 different variables in your rankings. One is the quality of the appearance of a cast member on SNL. So how do you define, how high quality an appearance is?
That's definitely the hottest spot, because there's, sometimes you can't always tell if it's a lead or a supporting, but I kind of just use common sense. And like I said, I kind of made myself rules to keep it consistent, but also so anybody could do it. You guys could just, take the rules and do it yourself, and it should be the same result that I get. So I have 4 categories. I have A for leads, and that's just someone who's clearly the lead in the sketch. They're in the entire sketch, or they kind of carry it. They dictate the tempo of the sketch. They either have the most lines, the most screen time, just something apparent. And then I have supporting roles, just somebody who's definitely not the focus, in it enough. Don't just have one line. They're not a space filler. Their character has a name, or they're not a lead, but they're not a small role. And then C is small roles. That's an unnamed character. You're on the screen, but you're not speaking. You're never the focus of it. You don't contribute that much, but you're on the screen. And then D is you're in the sketch in some capacity, but not physically. So you're a voiceover, or you're in a picture or something like that. So each one gets a value. Lead gets 3, supporting gets 2, small role gets 1, and then an off-screen role, I call it, gets a half. So
I'm sorry, have you done this for every season of the show, or has it been rolling?
I wish. It's been I kept tinkering with it, because I used to just like do one thing and then I was trying to combine them. So I've been going back to the past couple seasons to try to update it, but I just never wanted to do it with an episode that was edited because it would skew the data. So like on Peacock, a lot of the sketches are not on there.
Sure.
I used to look up episodes and they wouldn't all be there. So I was like, well, that's not going to be a fair representation as if you were watching the show in like 1991. You saw that person that night, You
got to talk to some of those guys who have like the VHS tapes from back in the day, like one SNL. Do you guys follow like the one day SNL project? Like those guys?
Yeah.
Like, so I bet some of those guys have the bootlegs of the full version before like they swapped out sketches and whatnot.
Yeah, actually, like I would say, I don't even know if I should be saying, but like 5 years ago, when I was going through the entire run, I was able to find like, the original copies of a lot of the shows. That's how I developed my stats. But I was trying to, work with Mike to figure out how we were going to get him to figure out, different statistics from different eras of the show. And unfortunately, because the originals of these shows are cut down, it's a little bit more difficult to do. But there are, like you said, Andy, really great resources out there that we can use in the meantime.
Which again is another reason personally that I see so much like allure to SNL history, is that a lot of it you have to, in this day and age, 2020, when everything is practically at your fingertips, you have to really work to be able to tell, which sketches Matthew Lawrence was in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's true. There is an SNL archives which is available online, and you can look up any cast members and different episodes and see which sketches they're in. So I think that's a good reference point for anyone who's watching an episode and want to see which sketches are cut out of them. But with regards to these rankings, like I said, we're looking at the quality of an appearance, and then we're also looking at the actual screen time, right, Mike?
Exactly. So I mean, it's not perfect, but it's pretty obvious if someone's a lead or if someone's like a backup dancer, So if you look back and see the actual sketch, you can tell.
The fly girl of the episode.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I like to use the example, like if you're Sudeikis dancing and like, what up with that?
Right.
Like such a good role, but not the lead of the sketch.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the listeners would be interested to know, how do you actually go about calculating screen time? Are you there sitting with like a stopwatch or your phone and measuring every person that walks in and out of a sketch?
I mean, sadly, yes, but it's usually after I watch it once live, the next day I'll just do that, and so I have like sometimes it's easy, like update I can do like Che and Jost at the same time with the two stopwatches on like my laptop, but if it's like that John Mulaney musical sketch, like that took like 45 minutes to do that one sketch.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. And if somebody is physically not on screen, but they're in the sketch, are they still counted for screen time?
So I'll pull up the rules for the screen time. So I always say it's these are like the commandments for screen time. Right. Like I'll send you the rules, because I said then you can do it yourself and it's fun. If they're either speaking or their face is seen, I count it. Or if they're just like the focus of the camera. So like if they zoom in on like someone's hand and that's the focus of this, the shot, then I count it. But if you're like in the sketch and you're not talking and you're not being seen, then I don't count it.
Okay, so that's really the methodology behind the rankings. So we have a weighted average where we're talking about two different variables. We're talking about screen time and we're talking about the quality of an appearance. So what I want to do in this podcast with Andy and Mike is two things. One, I want to talk about season 46. I mean, that's what we've been covering the last few weeks. I want to talk about, which cast members are doing well in Mike's rankings, which cast members aren't doing as well, so we can kind of judge the quality of their time on the show. And then Mike went back and he looked at the premieres of a few different seasons, season 1, season 5, season 17, 26, and 36. And we're going to talk about different eras of the show and how it compares a little bit, from now to those eras of the show, whether it's 10 or 20 years ago. Sounds good, guys?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So Mike, you sent me some stuff before. I'm going to put something on the screen. I'm going to put up the screen time, I guess, for all of the cast members so far. So up on screen is season 46 screen time. So, it's a little bit, there's a lot of numbers there, but Mike, I really want you to kind of break down for me, like, let's talk about our top players and our bottom players and, what we're determining as quality screen time. So up top, our top 5 for the season right now is Kate McKinnon, Colin Jost, Beck Bennett, Jim Carrey, and Kenan Thompson. Okay. So we have Jim in there, but let's take him out for a second because he isn't a cast member technically. But so the next one would be Michael Che. So it's Kate, Colin, Beck, Kenan, and Che. All right, so let's talk about the top. So Mike, is anything stands out for you with regards to our top 5 players?
Well, you have the 2 update guys, so that's no surprise. I think I should note that, I think Che had the 2 guest interviews on the first episode, and Jost has had I think almost all of them since. So every time I do the screen time, Jost has way more screen time than Che. But it's no surprise that they're both up there. And then Kate has just been dominating this season. So Kate is highest power ranking, right behind Kenan probably for appearances, and then highest screen time. And I think she's ahead by 4 minutes ahead of the next person.
Yeah, 4 minutes, which is crazy. That's actually a significant number. So, you might be listening to this podcast and wondering well, how much screen time do these people really get? There's an hour and a half show every single week. So you think it must be hours, but really in the 6 episodes we've had so far, Kate McKinnon has had the most screen time and she's only had 38 minutes and 40 seconds. So at least you guys kind of get an idea of what we're looking at. Kate's at 38:40. Colin is at 34:19. Beck is at 34:17. Kenan is at 24:08, and Che is at 23:57. So, Andy, anything stand out for you with our top 5?
Yeah, 2 things. The first is, Kate obviously coming out so strong out of the gate these first 6 seasons. It raises the larger, question about how much longer she'll be staying in the cast, whether it's December or whether it's the end of the season. And more specifically, I think it's a reflection of the fact that, Kate remains the show's all-star, the show's face, so to speak. And, she's really kind of been left alone because of the 2 other cast members who even come close to her. Cecily and 80 are off filming their side projects, their own shows at the moment. So Kate's kind of left alone to really run with the baton, so to speak. That said, the other thing that really jumps out besides, the 2 upgate guys is, Beck Bennett has emerged as, the unlikely but quiet MVP of the cold opens. Everyone always talks about, Alec Baldwin, Jim Carrey, and Maya Rudolph. But in terms of providing some semblance of connective tissue from the cast, it hasn't been Kate McKinnon as much this season. What with her Hillary Clinton being largely sidelined this election cycle, it's been Beck Bennett and his ability to play Mitch McConnell or Mike Pence or Wolf Blitzer. So, beyond the fact that Kate and to a lesser extent Kenan Thompson remain the big faces of the show, I think it's really indicative of Beck's versatility with these political impressions that he's gotten so much screen time in the cold open.
Yeah, and Mike, just so I understand, with the screen time we're looking at on screen right now, you have some numbers that are in green and some numbers in red. Is that their top score and their bottom score with regards to screen time?
Exactly. So I think the highest one is that second episode with Kate, and I think it's funny because I think half of that was the Wayne We Notice update appearance that was over 5 minutes long.
Yeah, they really doubled down on that one.
And to Andy's point, which he made a great point, is I actually have a more advanced stat on the openings, and Beck has 9 minutes 11 seconds of the season in just the opens. And
yeah,
obviously behind Carrie, Maya Rudolph, and Alec.
Right.
Interesting. So one of the things that, Andy, I forget if it was with you or it was on another panel this season, but we were actually having a Beck Bennett conversation earlier in the year about how Beck has so much screen time, but, he's not necessarily seen as, maybe Kate is someone that this will translate off the show, but, people does Beck stand out as the star of the show at this point in his career? And, I had some conversations with people who were loosely affiliated with the show, and they actually told me that the reason that Beck gets so much screen time is because he absolutely kills it whenever a writer writes a sketch for him, and then they go to the room where they read all the sketches on a Tuesday or Wednesday. He kills it whenever he reads anybody's sketches. So writers love to write for Beck because he will go like 150% for whatever anybody writes for him, whereas other cast members may not do that. So I think that really like gives him a leg up with regards to screen time. And
I also think, Beck is somebody who's kind of carved a niche for himself in an era that is really focused on spotlighting female cast members, which is obviously great. As well as more diverse cast members. He's kind of established himself as the oblivious white guy who we can, laugh at and play off of so often. So he's I absolutely believe to hear that about his work ethic. And I think it goes hand in hand with the fact that he's got a nice little corner pocket in terms of being a part of the cast.
Yeah, exactly. And let's continue to go down the list a little bit and let me know if anybody stands out for you, someone you want to talk about. So after Che, we had Maya, who is not currently part of the cast. We have Mikey Day, Alec Baldwin, who's not part of the cast. We then have Pete Davidson, Chris Redd, Ego Nwodim, Heidi, Kyle, Bowen, Chloe, Alex, and then Lauren, Melissa, 80, and then Punky, Andrew, Higgins, and Cecily.
Can I ask one question? Yeah, I'm interrupting. Go ahead.
No, please, Andy, go ahead. Yeah.
I don't remember Cecily's second appearance. What was that?
It was just a voiceover.
Okay, so that is actually a cut sketch that was filmed preseason that they aired in episode 3.
Oh, I don't remember which one.
Yeah, so that was the eBay sketch.
Okay.
Yeah, it was originally intended for the Chris Rock episode, and it was cut and placed in the Issa Rae episode.
Gotcha. Very good.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the bottom cast members and some of the cast members who aren't doing as strong. I mean, we know that whenever cast members are featured players and they're new, obviously, Punky, Andrew, Lauren, we don't expect to get so much screen time from them. But really, like Melissa, we only have, in one episode, 32 seconds, another 2 minutes 44, another 2:30, and another 8 seconds. And we had 2 episodes where she wasn't even on the show. And then we have, like a little bit ahead of her, we have Alex and Chloe and Bowen. So let's talk about those guys and how can we get more from them? So Andy, I'll start with you.
Well, I think again, this is such a historical year, in terms of the number of cast members and what with the cold open and the hemorrhaging monologue as Mike alluded to, I think earlier, and updating the musical performances. There's not a lot of room for regular old cast members to run the ball. Go back to the sports metaphor. Particularly when there's 20 of them. I mean, a few of them aren't in New York at the moment. But I can't imagine, besides like maybe 1980, there being a worse year to be a featured player in Saturday Night Live cast. It's unfortunate. And when you think of someone like Melissa Villaseñor, who's been a part of the cast for so long, SNL Twitter is always crying out for the gods at Studio 8H to give her more opportunity. And for some reason, maybe it's going back to the observation about Beck Bennett, somehow she's not able to seal the deal at read through or what it is. But, there's some sort of disconnect going on, and that's limiting her ability to appear on the show, which is too bad because I'm a fan.
Yeah. Mike, what stands out to you from the cast members who aren't doing as well with regards to screen time?
Well, the obvious 80, Cecily not there, and then the featured players, as you mentioned. But I think it's that they're kind of painting some of these cast members like maybe one-trick ponies, like Kyle and Melissa. If they get their chance, it's usually one sketch. So if you don't make it in that one sketch, and I think a lot of them get cut after dress. So Melissa might have like a really funny thing that she wrote with somebody. I think Kyle does that all the time. Last season, we would see those like on YouTube next day, like cut sketches. Like he was featured in that sketch a lot, but it just didn't make it to air. So I think that might explain that. For Alex, I don't know what is going on with Alex. I was looking back, John, at the season 1, and I did the some stats for like the first episode, and I included the Muppets for fun, and I was like, Alex Moffat would kill to get Muppet numbers right now.
Oh, that's so funny. Did he get Mr. Bill numbers? That's my question.
I did. I got Mr. Bill numbers in the season 5 one. I did.
Okay. So we'll get to that in just a little bit. But yeah, it's very true. I mean, one of the things we spoke about in the last couple episodes was more Alex. We would love to have a couple people that, before we move on from the screen time, is that I really want to point out is Ego and Chris, who, you know, to me have been standing out as doing some incredible work so far in the first 6 episodes. And they're like right in the middle with regards to screen time. So to me, you know, you can't always go by the numbers for everything. But, you know, to me, they have high quality screen time as far as I'm concerned. Andy, you agree with that?
I do. I mean, Chris, it's so bizarre because I'm looking at the numbers and he'll be in, you know, 4 or 5 minutes of an episode consistently, which is great. But then he'll just, you know, lay a goose egg, you know, in episode 2 of the season. And then this last episode, you know, with hosted by Dave Chappelle, which kind of boggles my mind. You know, you would think that they would have connected Chris Redd. You know, I assume that he's a fan of Chappelle's. You know, given his legendary status as a, you know, black stand-up comedian, it seems odd, you know, that they wouldn't have connected them in some way. So I wonder what's going on there. I don't know if Mike has any insight.
With Chris Redd, no. I mean, he's like the star of the pre-tapes. He's like the new, you know, Sandberg. So right. I think they probably put a lot of money or time into the pre-tapes that he does, especially the musical ones. So I would bet that they would be remiss if they didn't air them. So I would have guessed that the 2 that he was not in, maybe they had a pre-tape that they didn't throw in there. And then the Chappelle one, probably just because it was such a weird episode. There was not a lot of sketches in that episode, so they had to jam everyone into that Mario sketch. And if you weren't in that one, then I guess you were in like the Hailstorm one or something.
Right.
I'm gonna throw out a call. I think if you take a look at the screen time right now, I think we were talking about how to translate success from on the show to off the show when a cast member leaves. I think when you have those 0 columns, like, you know, Chris has a 0 in episode 2 and a 0 in episode 6, I think that is probably the worst thing that can happen to you with regards to screen time on the show. I think you would rather be someone like Ego, who we have basically averages, I would say, you have that there, averages 3 minutes and 1 second on the show. But, you know, the difference in the times between, you know, like the lowest she has is 1 minute and 51 seconds and the highest is 3 minutes and 55 seconds. To me, that's really interesting with regards to screen time because, you know, she doesn't dip too low and she doesn't go up too high. And I wonder that the people who, you know, like Chris was in 5 or 6 sketches in episode 5 and then didn't appear in episode 6. I would say that's probably worse for his opportunities off the show than it is for someone like Ego. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking, and you guys let me know if this analogy tracks or not, that I'm thinking back to sports. It's a little like, you know, in baseball, you know, where consistency is king, you know. If you see a ball club that's very streaky, that might, you know, win a series or 2, but then they drop 10 straight, that's really indicative of a larger problem in the show. You know, so I wonder if there's something similar here to your point, where it's better for a cast member to get that solid 4 or 5 minutes every episode instead of just vanishing for half the season.
Yeah, and I think you have somebody like that with Keenan as well, where you have someone who doesn't go like too high, doesn't go too low, but really makes high quality appearances in every single episode. Mike, what do you think?
I think this is just a really interesting question because it's probably like the reason that I started doing this metric is because I don't know if it's a good thing to just be a consistent sketch player. Like Ego, she finally had like a really standout appearances in the last episode. But if you're like Keenan, I mean, Keenan's like the MVP. He like shoulders the show. So maybe he's a good example of this or a bad example. But if you're kind of just consistently in there and you're never really taking the spotlight, I think that might not bode well for your post SNL career. I'm sure we could think of examples of people who have been on the show that did exactly that, but never really panned out afterwards, where some people had just flash in the pans and then they probably went on and did more things. So if you're like a Taron Killam or you're an Ego Wodum or Bobby Moynihan, you're like, I think they're all great on the show. I don't know if they're going to like be box office stars. So Chris Redd, I think, is interesting. He's also a stand-up, and I don't know if he's the type of guy that I think could have a movie sometime.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of gets to a larger question for me, that I've been talking to friends about. There's really not a landscape for, a film career for an SNL comedian these days or cast member. Like the runway that we had, even a decade ago doesn't exist. I know other people keep focusing on that, but I think that could be one reason why we haven't seen as many cast members leave the show in the past couple of years. Like even Kate McKinnon, she gets like The Spy Who Dumped Me, didn't do too well. And even that, like those opportunities are few and far between these days. Like Ghostbusters, like didn't really pop, So it raises a larger question, with like, streaming and what's going on with movie theaters and the era of the pandemic. What happens to a cast member, even if they kill every season, every episode? Where do they go? What's the logical next step for a departing SNL cast member?
Yeah, and I think you're right. I would say probably like, what's the last that you can think of, Andy, the last like high quality movie appearance that we've had in the last like maybe 10 years from an SNL cast member? Is it Kristen Wiig?
I think it might be Bridesmaids, right?
Yeah. Like, yeah, that's what I was thinking, but I can't think of anything else right now that I could.
I mean, that class, is kind of part of the transition, where, like Jason Sudeikis, he had like We're the Millers and like a couple like okay mainstream, like, widely launched comedies, but now he's on Apple. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Bill Hader was a solid character actor for a minute there in movies, and now he's on HBO. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So we basically have the previous era are all in sitcoms, like Last Man on Earth, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. They did Portlandia, Ted Lasso. So it's like every single one of them was getting a sitcom as opposed to becoming movie stars, which I guess is a whole other conversation that we can cover in a different podcast. But for this purposes of this conversation, Mike, one of the things I would love to track in the future whenever we sit down again and have a conversation is like, if you go to the biggest movie stars that have ever been on the show, like your Chevy Chases, I know he was on the show right at the beginning and was the star of the show right away and left pretty early, but like Chevy and Aykroyd and Will Ferrell, like I'm trying to think of like Murphy, like our big megastars that were on the show. I'm curious if we could notice a pattern in their screen time from episode to episode. Is it that like quality where it doesn't dip too low and doesn't go up too high? And then can we find those patterns in any of our current cast members?
That's the big question. I think it's probably more of a historical question, whereas if you know the backstory of like what exactly Lorne Michaels' plan was, like did he want to create like a camp for like breeding leading men to be in movies? Like if that was his goal, then he got his Will Ferrell of the 90s and he got his Chevy and he got his Eddie Murphy. But if he wanted to have quality sketch players for 7 seasons and then dip out, then that's good too. So I think that the numbers question would be that there might be a peak. But I would probably guess that it just if you come into the show and doing a ton of leads, you leave the show doing a ton of leads, you're going to get calls for leads. If you never do that, you're probably just not going to get those calls, and you're probably doing a cartoon voiceover like Chris Parnell or Bobby Moynihan.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Let me bring up the next set of stats you sent me, and these are the appearance scores. So we talked about that there's two different variables that we were looking at. We were looking at screen time and appearance scores. So basically, you created a formula that takes a look at whether a appearance was an A appearance, a B appearance, a C appearance, or a D appearance, and then we have the scores for every single episode and every cast member. What's their appearance score? And I'll give you the top 5 for this one, and there are some similarities and there are some differences between the appearance score and the quality of screen time, or the amount of screen time. So number 1 is Keenan with regards to a quality appearance. And then we have Kate, then Beck, Ego, and Mikey are the top 5. So right now we have Ego and Mikey who are in the top 5 here, but they weren't in the top 5 for appearances. For screen time. So Mike, what would cause the differences between, someone in the top 5 in this category, but not in the other?
Well, again, that's the exact reason that this exists, is because they are different. And if you count one or the other, it just does not tell the whole story. So Ego and Mikey are perfect is that you can plug them in anywhere and they're going to do a good job. Keenan, you wouldn't really want to waste with a small role, but he's going to make every sketch better. Whereas I'm looking down the list, like I guess mentioned earlier, like someone like Kyle, like he doesn't really get a lot of those like newscaster roles that someone else is going to get. So Kyle's going to get like a weird lead role. So the difference is that someone like Ego or Mikey is going to just be around a lot, but they're just not going to be on camera the whole time, like someone in a political sketch.
Mm-hmm. And let me give the list before I bring in Andy, so that everybody who's listening on audio knows. So we have Keenan, Kate, Beck, Ego, Mikey, followed by Heidi, Maya, Chris, Pete, Alex, Kyle, Chloe, Colin, Che, Jim Carrey, Bowen, Lauren, Punky, Melissa, Adie, Andrew, Higgins, and then Cecily. So Andy, anything really stand out for you?
Again, I think it underscores the dynamic we were talking about earlier, where Keenan and Kate continue to be the go-tos, the stars, the Mount Rushmore. Beck, it speaks to his versatility, which is a little underrated or understated or what have you. And then again, Ego, as people have been saying, has really, established herself, and which has surprised me a little bit, because it doesn't seem that long ago that, someone like Sashir Zamata was being so underutilized. Ego has really connected in a way that, other cast members have not. So this is, really speaks to her rise in the show and her insurgence there. And then Mikey Day, I think, does a lot of writing, and this could perhaps be a reflection of that. He casts himself in sketches and such.
Yeah. And I guess, like, if you are a cast member, Mike, and you're saying to yourself, like, I want to make an impact on the show, would you say it's more important to have a high quality appearance, be the lead in a sketch, or is it more important to have that longer screen time in an episode?
I would say it's probably better to just stand out once. I try to find what a golden number is, and I think I decided that you want, in the power rankings, maybe we'll talk about them later, but you want to be like around a 60, and that's kind of like a good middle ground to be in with appearances and screen time. And that usually means that you must have got at least one lead in the sketch. So if you're not getting a lead week after week, then, I don't know what else to tell you, but I think that I'd rather be just in the cold open and be in the first sketch, and then you don't see me ever again, then I'd be happy with that. Yeah,
exactly. Well, let me bring up the power rankings. I'll do that right now. I'm going to open those up. All right, and over here we have our power rankings. So this takes both things into consideration. It takes the quality of the appearance and the length of screen time. So our top 5 for our power rankings so far this season, and this is the average power ranking for the 6 episodes. We have Kate in first place, Beck in second place, Keenan in third, Colin in fourth, and Ego in fifth place with regards to our top 5. And then our bottom 5 for our cast members, at our lowest point is Cecily. Then above that is Andrew, then Adie, Melissa, and then Punky. And then I guess if you take out Aidy and Cecily, you also have Lauren and Chloe above them. So let's talk a little bit about the power rankings, Mike, because I know you want to get into that. So you said around what score is the good score to have?
I said like north of 60 you want to be at to be like an impact.
Okay. So really only our top 5, Kate, Beck, Keenan, Colin, and Ego, are averaging over 60.
Right. And that's like the oldest argument right now with SNL fans is like that there's too many guest stars. So I think that's probably has a big thing to do with it. But that's why I went back to the old seasons, and you can still see then that the cast members that you remember are still around 60. Mm-hmm.
And Andy, I think, before we kind of get into some of the older seasons and talk about that, tell me if if anything stands out to you here. And then if you're one of these, middle cast members, like not at the top of the list, not at the bottom of the list, what recommendation would you make to kind of, push them up the list a little bit and give them a bump between now and, let's say, Christmas?
I would sit down with Kate and Keenan and discuss their exit strategy from the show. It's a bottleneck. It's a total bottleneck. You know what I mean? Like, this is a story of ascendance and descendants, right? Like you can see the next generation. It's almost about like the story of the economy right now, where baby boomers are hanging on, and the younger millennials and beneath them are waiting to build wealth. Like Andrew Dismukes. I'm probably looking up the chart at Kyle Mooney, waiting for him to bid adieu to go do whatever Kyle has planned post show. Same with Lauren Holt and some of these other folks. I think it's a question of when do they get their moment to shine. And it just feels it remains very top heavy.
Yeah. And Mike, what about you? Any advice for anyone who wants to go up in your rankings?
Absolutely. You have to get those top dogs out, because 20 people in the cast, there's no chance that Kate is going to stick around. And I'm sure, but I also bet Lauren is begging those people to stay because people want the familiarity. So until Cecily and Aidy and Kate are gone, then if you're a female cast member, I think you're out of luck.
Yeah. Let's call this a little bit more. Like there was once a time where Lorne Michaels would not let cast members leave the show to go do side projects. I believe that was a reason for why John Lovitz left the show after 5 seasons. He wanted to film a movie on the side, and that was a no-go. So John left. Taran Killam being another one. And I know that there's some politics and some intricacies that I'm skipping over, but the fact is that it used to be, there's no such things as halfway crooks when it comes to being an SNL cast member. You're either part of the show or you're not part of the show. And right now, for a variety of reasons that I'm sure we've talked about and alluded to, Lauren is permitting cast members to have their cake and eat it too. They can go run off and do a show for Amazon, and then they can pop in and it's like the kid that won't graduate high school or something,
Yeah. And I was going to say, Andy, like, let me push back just a little bit with you guys before we kind of get into the history of SNL and how other people have done. If you're a listener right now, you're hearing the advice that you guys are giving, and you're saying, but these cast members have no control over whether other people leave or not. So if I'm one of these 20 people and I produce high quality content, but I'm just not getting, making my mark on the show enough, it's not my fault. So is there anything else that we can kind of say to these people about, like someone who's in the middle, maybe like a Bowen or a Kyle? I guess, this has been the story of Kyle's SNL career, but anything else we could say to these cast members besides just like hope the top guys leave?
Well, I mean, the cardinal rules that you always hear, right, are write for yourself, right? Insert yourself in sketches that you can't be cast out of. And the second, hit him at the update desk, right? Like that's the famous, like I think Chris Rock, right? Like you always got to do a update commentary. That's how you really get a spark. That's how you win the audience onto your side. So, like snark aside about the fact that this is such a top heavy cast, I think these guys got to really establish themselves at the update desk, and they really have to learn how to write for themselves in terms of sketches. And you know what? Like let's call it for what it is. develop a political impression, develop a sketch that maybe you don't need a perfect Joe Biden, because that role is unfortunately being spoken for at the moment. But maybe you get a great impression of, the NBC News anchor that is going to be included in the next debate sketch or whatever. You know what I mean? Like maybe someone needs to develop a really spot on John King or what have you. You know what I mean? Like something like that might be an effective way to build some screen time.
Yeah, and I would also think that as Biden starts to fill out his cabinet, like that's now's the time to start working on some of these impressions of other people he might be surrounding himself with.
Mike, he's going to be Marty Walsh. Mike, what do you think? Is Mayor Walsh going to be in the cabinet?
Oh, I don't think so, but I think Alex would probably take that.
You don't think he's going to be Secretary of Labor?
No? What about Tom Brady?
No, he's busy.
Yeah, I guess so.
He lives in a red state now.
Yeah,
but I would say embrace the weird stuff, because if you like Bill Hader, like he brought characters. So like he was like, I think he auditioned and he had Vinny Vedecci and he had a Vincent Price and stuff. So the political advice I think is spot on, because you just know that there's going to be a well to go to, and you're like, oh, I do that person. But if you can bring some characters that you make and you just keep pushing them, obviously kill it at the table reads like we talked about. But if you're an up and comer, just be like, I have these wacky ideas, and if you keep pitching them, I feel like they're going to say, all right, we have to give this a shot, because SNL is known for, I know, John, you're like a Will Forte guy, so it's like I don't know how many times he pitched Falconer or
the potato chip.
Right, exactly. So
but I feel like
if you do that, it's going to work eventually.
Yeah, but respectfully, the show is so different from the Will Forte era, right? Like right. I don't know if you probably have the stats, but between the monologue, the cold open, the musical performances, and update, like that's 60% of the show. Like I don't even know. So I think it's so tough. I think that's so tough.
Well, let's cover that. Exactly. So let me start with this. I'm going to put the power rankings, Mike's power rankings from the first episode of this season on the screen, because what we're looking at is we want to make, comparisons between premieres over different years. So I'm going to put that up right now, and that's this year's premiere with Chris Rock. So here we go. There. So right now we have the power rankings on screen for season 46, episode 1. So Mike, tell me what stands out to you here for this year's premiere, and what we should kind of look at as we move through the other years.
Well, first of all, Chris Rock for a host score is like on the lower side. I think he did a couple of supporting roles, and his monologue was longer than most, but it was like 7 minutes. So that kind of stands out to me. I mean, it's definitely weird to have the person below the host be a guest, but Jim Carrey that was a long opening in that first week. And then 80, you have she was definitely like the top dog in that show, and then we haven't really seen her since. But I think that they probably made a concerted effort to include everybody except Melissa. But that's why we have a big list here. Yeah,
that's true. And Andy, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting to hear that this is a lesser host score historically. I'd be curious, like what the average host score tends to be, or if other seasons or other episodes this season, whether they've gone above 190 or not.
Yeah, Mike, what is the typical host score? Because we have Chris Rock here at a 190.05.
This season's average like 230.
Really?
Okay. Yeah, and I've some of the older ones, like a Steve Martin score. I'm sure, John, if you pull that one up later, that one's like north of 300.
Wow.
Okay. Well, so that's interesting. So we really talked about season 46. Let's go back 10 years. So we're going to go to season 36, and that's with host Amy Poehler and musical guest Katy Perry. That's September 25th, 2010. So we have, a very different cast. Like Keenan's still a part of it. we have a different cast. So let me pull that one up on screen. All right, so over here we have the screen, the rankings for season 36, episode number 1. So, Mike, tell me what the differences are that you see in these rankings versus the ones from season 46, and then I'll give the list.
The list of 46?
Yeah. So basically, like, do you see any? So here, I'll give the list for the audience. So we have Amy Poehler at the top with a score of 277, which is pretty far up from Chris Rock at 190. Then we have Kristen Wiig, who was dominating the show in 2010. Kristen, Fred Armisen, Bill Hader, Seth Meyers, who was doing Update Alone at the time, Maya Rudolph, who I don't believe was on the show, but probably cameoed.
That was Bronx Beat.
Right. Okay. And then Sudeikis, Sandberg, Vanessa Bayer, Abby Elliott, David Patterson made a cameo, Jay Farrow, Katy Perry, musical guest, Justin Timberlake. I think he was on Weekend Update that week, was it?
He was in briefly in the monologue, and then he had a quick little like actor studio type of sketch with Andy Samberg.
Okay. And then Nassim Pedrad, Paul Burton, who was barely on the show. Keenan was very low for this week, and Bobby, Tina, who appeared, Jimmy Fallon appeared as well. Oh yeah, okay, I remember this episode now. Taron Killam, Rachel Dratch also appeared, and Peter Sarsgaard also cameoed. So let's talk about the differences. We're only looking back 10 years out of the 45, but anything really stand out to you, Mike, between the list that we see here in season 36 versus the typical list we see on a season 46 episode?
Well, definitely. I mean, it stands out right away that there are 4 actual cast members that have scores over 70. So it just means that there are probably, they brought back a former SNL player. They brought back Amy Poehler. So they're like going to do more sketches, or, she's going to have more of a hand in it. So maybe she likes to work with those people, but also like Wiig, Armisen, Hader, they're all over 100. And so we're not getting anyone that's like nailing hundreds every week this season. That's what stands out to me.
Yeah. What about you, Andy?
Yeah, I was going to echo that exact same thing, that it's, really a testament to how much more empowered the cast was back then. And each one of them, like we were saying earlier, each one of them has gone on to big things. It's just, it's really striking, and the contrast.
Yeah. And for those people who are like wondering about what was happening at the show at the time, we had about 14 cast members. So, a little bit down from 20, but still not, our smaller cast that we had in, the 70s and the 80s. And this show is actually the first episode for Vanessa Bayer, Paul Burton, Taron Killam, and Jay Farrow. And this was also the first episode without Will Forte as well.
Oh, wow. So this is kind of a really interesting snapshot episode, it sounds like. You have a cast member here who is still a cast member on the show, and you have cameos from people who started on the show in the late 90s. So that covers like 23 seasons of the show's, half the show's existence. Cast members have their fingerprints, and they're on this episode specifically.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's always interesting when you see a premiere and you have so many new cast members. I believe it was in the monologue where Amy actually introduced the new cast members. So I think this was a change of the guard type of episode. So I'm not sure if this premiere is, your typical premiere in the middle of an era. This is really, I would say, the start of 2010 is the transition from the old era to the new era. And we have some cast members, leaving, by 2012, 2013. But, it is definitely interesting to make the comparison to like a 20-person cast to a 14-person cast. But maybe this episode isn't necessarily like ideal for seeing in the, the 2010, 2011 era, what type of scores we see. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, and do you remember the introduction and the monologue? Because it was a bit. It was, she did a whole speech about how honored she was to be back, and she remembers what it was like to be on her first show. And they do like a literally 1 second cut to all 4 of them just like waving to the camera, and then right back to
that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is something I could see them doing now with like a Lauren and an Andrew and a Punky. So it's not so dissimilar when you're a new cast member. It takes you a while to move up the ranks.
Which I just wanted to mention because it was like you guys have talked about SNL being meta, and it's almost funny to mention the new cast member hazing like as if they're all clawing for screen time and it's a war backstage. Yeah,
that's very true. And season, I guess was this this was 10 years ago. Okay, so this was not an election year, but we are going to go back another 10 years to 20 years ago in 2000, and we'll talk about season 26, which was also an election year. So that'll be interesting. Maybe there's more of a comparison there between season 26 and season 46. So I'll bring that up. All right, so I just brought up the scores for season 26 compared to season 46. So our list is, we have Will Ferrell at the top. We have Rob Lowe at number 2. We have Daryl Hammond at number 3. Chris Parnell, number 4. Jimmy Fallon, Molly Shannon, Tina Fey, Jerry Minor, Horatio Sands, Chris Kattan, Tim Meadows, Tracy Morgan, Maya Rudolph, Ralph Nader, who I guess made a cameo, Anna Gasteyer, Eminem, Lorne, who appeared, Jim Downey, Brendan Fraser, who I guess appeared as well, Paula Pell, who was a writer at the time, T-Shawn Shannon as well, a writer, and Higgins as well. So
I remember really well. Eminem does stan on this episode. This is like peak 2000 Marshall Mathers LP Eminem.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the first debate sketch between George W. Bush and Al Gore as our opening. So this is actually a lot similar to what we have now, which is on our premiere where we saw the first debate sketch between Trump and Biden. So Mike, tell me what you see. Any differences here between what you would see like 20 years ago versus now?
Well, the biggest thing is Will Ferrell. Like, that's the highest score I've seen since doing this metric. It's 358. So I mentioned earlier that like the hosts are averaging 230 this season, and then you have Will Ferrell just smashing that.
Yeah, that's really incredible. I mean, I'm just taking a look at what Will Ferrell was in that episode. It was the first presidential debate. He was in a Monday Night Football sketch where Jimmy Fallon played Dennis Miller. He was also in a sketch called Blind Date and Dateline Pre-Tapes. And so really 4 sketches, but high quality appearances that he led. And I assume, like, when you're playing George W. Bush in a very famous first debate sketch, that you're going to be on screen a lot and your appearances are going to be high quality. So Andy, anything you see here that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to how dominant Will Ferrell was during this era. And what's also a little surprising to me is 2 things. If I remember, is this the beginning of Tina on Update? Am I making this up? Did you guys say that?
No, I don't think you're making that up. Let me just check when Colin Quinn left Update.
I think this might be the start of Jimmy and Tina, if I'm not mistaken. So if that's the case, I'm just spitballing at the numbers, but
you are right. This is sorry to interrupt you. This is Tina Fey and Jerry Minor's first episodes.
So this is kind of a big deal in the show's history. I mean, Tina and Jimmy remake Update in their image, and Update really has been carried on to a certain extent with their aesthetic in mind. I think, all the bromance stuff with Jost and Che aside, Tina is really kind of overtakes the update that we'd seen in previous iterations. So this is a key episode. And the second point that I was going to have, since this is also Jerry Minor's first episode, I think him and Tina were friends or had worked together previously. So it's pretty fitting that they have their first episode together. This seems like a pretty high number for Jerry, who did not go on to set the show on fire, if I'm mistaken. You guys let me know if that tracks.
Tracks to me. I mean, I see that Jerry Minor had a Weekend Update appearance where he played a Grandmaster Rap, and I think he was on with
Eminem. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was probably his big showing of the night. I can't see really anything else that he was in throughout the entire evening.
Monologue.
Oh, he was an audience member in the monologue. Okay.
Yeah. That was probably his first appearance in the show.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I mean, so this is a very different cast. I mean, I know that most people talk about there's a major inflection point throughout the history of the show, which is basically when the Will Ferrell cast starts. And that's the last time that a cast has ever been, completely thrown out and started over. And then everything that we've had, from that point on, from, when Will joined the show, has basically been, people leaving and coming. But we've had a very, easy transition from, one cast to the next since that time. So it's very interesting to take a look at this cast as basically the beginning of, what a lot of people consider new SNL. Right. And we see, like the highest of quality that we have during this era. You have like a Will Ferrell, a Daryl Hammond, a Chris Parnell, Jimmy Fallon, Molly Shannon, who was in her last season on the show here. These people are like big name stars who were really dominating the show at the time. And, even Tim Meadows, who actually wasn't a cast member at the time, but he has a pretty high quality appearance. He cameos in this episode as well.
Yeah, and actually, now that you bring up Molly Shannon, I believe, since this is her last season on the show, she dates back to that 94-95 season, if I'm remembering correctly. So she's kind of the last bridge, in a sense, to, the Sandler, Norm Macdonald, Chris Farley era. So just to kind of underscore your point about Will Ferrell, and this new quote modern SNL taking over during this period.
Yeah, I think we basically had we had Tim Meadows, Molly Shannon, and David Spade, and then Norm Macdonald were probably the only holdovers, I think, between that previous cast and this new era of SNL at the time. All right, so next up, we're going to talk about season 17. Mike, you pulled up some stats from season 17 of the show, and this is, a different era of the show. This is an era, that prominently features, Dana Carvey, Kevin Nealon, Phil Hartman, Mike Myers, and this is the beginning of, the Chris Farley, Chris Rock, Adam Sandler era. So let's talk about that a little bit, because this is a transition cast from one era to another. So I'm going to bring that up right now. Here we go. So this is episode 2 of season 17. And Mike, why did you choose episode 2 as opposed to episode 1 of season 17?
Just because I get it unedited.
Okay. Okay, got it. Perfect. So Mike, tell me what stands out to you with this cast. Our list is, we have Jeff Daniels, Dana Carvey, Kevin Nealon, Phil Hartman, Julia Sweeney, Mike Myers, Chris Farley, Siobhan Fallon, Rob Schneider, Al Franken, Ellen Cleghorn, Victoria Jackson, Chris Rock, Adam Sandler, and Lauren. So, Mike, anything stand up to you?
I think this is probably one of the times in the show that it was just, they had so many great male leads. So, I mean, look at the names on here. So, Dana Carvey was like ushered in all these guys. He came in with Phil Hartman. Kevin Nealon came in with Victoria Jackson, and he came in with Jan Hooks. So, but look at the Dana Carvey, Kevin Nealon, Phil Hartman, and then Mike Myers was right after. So when they came in, that's not even including the Chris Farley, Adam Sandler's, David Spade, Rob Schneider's. But in this episode, it was good because we had the Rob Schneider, making copies. That sketch was in there. But there was like no room for any of the women in this cast. So either it's because they didn't write for women well, or because they just knew they had so many good dudes in the cast that could do anything.
Well, so I talked to Siobhan Fallon about this over the summer, and she said, just to your point, the culture at the time there was the girls got one sketch, and that was just kind of it, and that's just how it was. So my question for you, Mike, I don't remember this particular episode off the top of my head. Was this a Delta 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 episode? Is that sketch in there?
No, I don't see that one. We do have the making copies, like Mike said. We have an episode of the Chris Farley show, which I believe is probably one of the first appearances of that.
That's a classic. But I'm wondering how Siobhan is so high in this particular episode. She's still just number 8, but I'm curious what she featured in that made her rank above almost all the other women in the cast besides Julia Sweeney.
She was on A Real Life with Jane Pauley. She was one of the guests on that show, and then she did 2 voiceovers, and then was one of the contestants in like a game show.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, we had a game show sketch called Community College Bowl, which featured a lot of the cast in this episode.
Gotcha. Okay.
She did not speak in the sketch, so she got a C for a small appearance.
I just noticed she joined Cameo. So folks listening, check out Siobhan Fallon on Cameo.
Yeah. And also this is actually right after Jan Hooks leaves the show. And she obviously had a major impact on the show. So they were looking for a new female to replace her. And obviously we're in a very different time now, but at the time, we're really looking at 3 women who are basically in the cast in a year-to-year basis. And right now it was Siobhan, Victoria Jackson, who remained from the last cast, and then Ellen Cleghorn. So it is interesting to see. This is very different, but what I will tell you is extremely similar between season 17 and season 40 is the amount of cast members in season 17. And this is this episode actually takes place right before Beth Cahill and Melanie Hutzel joined the cast. But basically you had 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 cast members. So it's not like that different between then and now, except you have some really high quality appearances with regards to their scores, Mike.
Right. Yeah. I mean, everyone's in there. This also just one of the things about the score is that I wanted to be fair to, because some shows have a lot of sketches, some shows don't. Some shows have longer sketches. That's a factor. Is that when I was watching the show, I was like, wow, all these sketches made it. I mean, maybe the musical performances were just shorter, or the monologue with Jeff Daniels was shorter, but I was like, there was just sketch after sketch. So like everyone was making contributions, and even Adam Sandler and Ellen Cleghorn and Chris Rock, like at least they spoke in that community college sketch.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said in a previous appearance on this podcast that I've also been watching these Peacock episodes, and it's really striking and obvious how quick the cold opens and the monologue go during this era of the show compared to how front loaded it is now. Like 9 or 10 minutes and you're done, and the show is just getting started,
Yeah, it is very different. And I was also going to check, because I know there was an era of the show where their musical guests were actually only doing one musical number. And I think that was probably in the early Will Ferrell era of the show. They were just doing one. But no, the Color Me Bad was the musical guest in this episode, and they actually did do 2. So this is a really interesting era of the show. This is, like I said, season 17 is a little bit of a transition from the Dana Carvey, Phil Hartman era into the Chris Rock, Adam Sandler era. So let's go back. We're going to go back even further to season 5 of the show. And season 5 is a really interesting season for me, because this is the first season without Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. And they started bringing on a lot of featured players that were writers on the show. Your Peter Aykroyds, your Brian Doyle Murrays, Paul Schaefer, Tom Schiller. So it was really interesting to see, because you had 2 stars of the show leave. And for the first time in 4 seasons, except for, Al Franken and Tom Davis and Bill Murray, you had a really major change up to the cast. So I'm going to bring up season 5, episode 1 stats. And here we go. And this is the last season where we had the original cast. Obviously, you can see, if you're looking on the screen, much smaller of a list. We have Steve Martin, who was the host. And Mike, you said he had a really big score, 332 over here. And then we have Bill Murray, who becomes really one of the stars of the show as he replaces Chevy. And then Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi obviously leave. So we have Steve Martin, Bill Murray, Jane Curtin, Gilda Radner, Garrett Morris, Tom Davis, Don Novello, who plays Father Guido Sarducci, Lorraine Newman, Al Franken, Jim Downey, who has had one of the writers at the time, Harry Shearer, Mr. Bill is in here, and Paul Schaefer and Buck Henry makes an appearance as well. At the time, there was a big rivalry between Buck Henry and Steve Martin about who was going to host more. So, Mike, anything stand out to you here?
Well, maybe Andy could actually help me shed some light on this. Is in the early years of SNL, was Lorne more demanding of his hosts to just be more game to do things? Like, is he a little easier on hosts now that, like, Steve Martin's a legend, but when I was doing the scores, I'm like, man, the host, they're like taking leads in so many more sketches. They're not, maybe they demanded themselves that they, like, if I'm going to be in the show, you better put me in every sketch. That could be like in their rider or something like that. But again, it stands out that, and then obviously Bill Murray, I would be surprised if he wasn't number 1.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is, SNL at its, most countercultural. This is before whereas the show was really entering the mainstream. So the hosts that they got were the ones that, were really fans of the show and were willing to do it and participate. It wasn't quite the publicity machine that it would, later become. where it was almost like an honor to host. For someone like Steve Martin, this is just a quintessential, host appearance. So the fact that he's that dominant, makes a lot of sense. And then having, someone like Bill Murray, up there at 226, again, just kind of shows, particularly in this vacuum with Belushi and Aykroyd gone, how much they relied on him as well. Tom Davis is not quite twice the amount that his partner Al Franken, but he's in, significantly higher score for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And as I mentioned, I mean, this is when they started really using those guys because, they needed extra people in sketches. So they started having all the writers, be background players in all the sketches, especially in season 5. And this is also when you have Bill Murray and Jane Curtin, who were both doing Weekend Update at the time. So you had, Chevy doing it in the first season and a bit, and then Jane, take over. And then Jane does it with Dan Aykroyd for a season, and then does it with Bill Murray until, the end of the 5 years. So, I would be curious if your scores for Weekend Update, Mike, would you think in the first 5 seasons where Update, was so impactful on the show, is there a major difference between, Bill Murray and Jane Curtin doing Update and then Colin Jost and Michael Che doing it now?
Well, Update just been way longer. I mean, I think people probably tune in for Update. Like they know that people are the next day will watch it on YouTube. So like, I'm sure you'll pull up the season 1 later, and then this one too. Like, Update's pretty short. I mean, it's definitely you're the star of the show, but they were probably content to have a solid 3 or 4 minute update instead of like a 7 or 8.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, well, let me bring up season 1 because you just mentioned it, and that's the last one we're going to look at tonight, and we'll take a look at some more as we kind of do more podcasts later in the season. But I'll bring up season 1, and this is the first episode of the show where George Carlin hosts. And for those who haven't seen the first episode of the show, you should know that SNL in its first couple episodes didn't really look exactly the way that SNL looks like now. It was more of a George Carlin doing some stand up, and it was really a variety show for the first episode, and then Paul Simon hosts the second episode, and it's really more of a concert for the second episode. But then as you get to episode 3 and Rob Reiner, it really starts to kind of pick up and look more like SNL. But as we're making comparisons for premieres, let's talk about the series premiere of the show. So we have George Carlin at the top, number 1. We have Chevy Chase, who is the original star of SNL. Then we have Belushi. We have Gilda, Dan Aykroyd, Garrett Morris, Jim Henson, who is, voicing a Muppet, I assume. Michael O'Donoghue, who was the head writer of the show at the time. Jane Curtin. We have another Muppet, George Coe, who was actually an original cast member, but only appeared for a few episodes. Lorraine Newman. Valerie Bromfeld, who I believe is making a cameo, Andy Kaufman, who was a frequent guest on the show, who would do some stand-up. We have Frank Oz playing a Muppet. And then if there's anything else that I would see at the bottom, just Albert Brooks really at the bottom, who I think had his first ever pre-tape on the show. So, Mike, anything stand out to you in the series premiere compared to, like a very different show to what we see now?
Well, just watching season 1, I don't have all the numbers. You probably have them, John, about if anyone, the first time that like they really left someone out in the dust, but everyone makes contributions. They like really use everybody pretty well. And George Carlin, like his score is actually like inflated, but I wanted to make it consistent. So I did, which is that his monologue was just like 4 stand-ups broken out. So if you're looking at the score, it's his score is pretty high, but he didn't appear in any sketches. He just had 4 different monologues. If you add them all together, I checked it out for you, John. It's like a little over 12 minutes. So it's still shorter than Chappelle's, even when you combine them all.
Yes, that's very true. Andy, what about you?
I mean, first, I believe Valerie Brumfield was Dan Aykroyd's comedy partner in Toronto. So I think it's worth pointing out, her backstory. As this was kind of her opportunity to get spotlighted on the show. I mean, I'm surprised to see how high George Coe is on this list. Who comedy fans will remember him later on from Archer and from a few other things. He kind of became a character actor, in the last couple of years of his life. But it's interesting to see him sort of middle of the pack. That's certainly not my memory of him being that prominent. And then just seeing, all the Muppet voices scattered throughout is pretty interesting and striking.
Yeah, so this is actually George Coe's only appearance as a cast member, I believe. And Michael O'Donoghue, who is the head writer for the first few years and comes back later on, he was a cast member as well for the first few episodes. So that's actually an interesting trivia question for those who are wondering. The series starts with 9 cast members, even though you have your original 7 that most people talk about, where Chevy leaves and Bill Murray comes in at some point.
Right.
Yeah, Mike, what do you think?
He speaks the first line in SNL history.
That is yes, that is very true. Yeah, Michael Donoghue. Exactly. And that's the feed your fingertips to the Wolverines sketch.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting having George Coe, in the first episode. I think he was in later episodes, but just wasn't credited, right?
I think he wrote at some point, but look, I think they wanted some. So if you take a look at that first episode, I don't know if this is ever cut out of any versions, because I really remember watching the full one, but they do have the first bee sketch where you have all the cast member playing bees, and this was like a running joke throughout the first 5 years of the show. And you do have George Coe playing the bee at the time, and I think maybe he just, with regards to like his look, he was a little bit of an older man. Like I don't know that he necessarily fit in with the group. I'm not sure what the reason was specifically that they took him out of being a cast member, but it is like a weird, interesting trivia question about like this person who was a cast member on the first ever episode of SNL and then not really heard from again.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Lorne Michaels' like 85, 86 year, where he was trying to bring in like a lot of diversity and have people from multiple backgrounds be cast members. And you can kind of see like in later seasons, they have like a Phil Hartman type who can play, the father figure and whatnot. Like I wonder if that was the rationale for George Coe, and then they just felt it didn't work with the sensibility of the time or something. But you're right. He is an outlier, and it's interesting. See, like I said, being as prominent as he is in this one-off episode appearance.
Yeah, that's true. Well, before we wrap everything up, and Mike, is there anything else you want to bring up about this first season of the show?
Well, it just, as you mentioned, it was a way different show. So they had 4 musical performances. You had a short film from Ella Brooks. You had a guest like stand up from Valerie Bromfield, and you had a guest from Andy Kaufman. So a lot of the screen time that, again, to keep it consistent, like I did count it because it was part of the comedy of the show. I didn't count the musical performances. But if I was going to count a digital short, I would count Albert Brooks's film, which, no one appears in the cast. So if you take it again, all the scores are relative to that episode. So you take a percentage of that, they're going to be a little lower. But
right,
it was still like a funny show. Like they still had good sketches, and they wanted to make a splash and say that this is a variety show, not necessarily a comedy show, but you're going to have a lot of sketch comedy. And George Carlin wasn't asked to do that. So you had to have Chevy Chase, John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd carry all that weight.
Yeah, and another very interesting trivia note is I believe George Carlin hosts the show again 10 years later when the show looks a lot more like SNL. So if you want to see George Carlin in actual sketches and being a host of SNL, you go ahead 10 seasons and you'll see that.
Yeah, so, I just put it on Peacock. It's funny.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that was really interesting. Before we wrap up, I do want to ask you, Mike, if someone is kind of skipping through and listening to some of the stats, but wants some major takeaways, is there anything that you can kind of sum up for the listeners that may be interesting to know about screen time and appearances throughout the years?
I think it's that. I mentioned this earlier, but I think it's the biggest takeaway is that both tell a pretty compelling story, but they don't tell the whole story. So when you take them both together, you're going to get a more accurate representation. And it's just fun to see, again, are you going to confirm your suspicion, or are you going to be proven wrong? Because, again, someone can just be in a sketch and they just might not be memorable. So I think the power ranking is really the best way to get a hold on that. Whether or not it's, entertaining is up to everybody else. But I think it's definitely effective because those are the only 2 metrics that you can objectively grab and you're not just playing favorites or counting something that's not there. So that's basically it.
Yeah, and Andy, any takeaways from what we showed you tonight?
It's been really illuminating. It's been really interesting. To see this quantified in this way. Because the show is so intangible in so many ways, and kind of mysterious in a strange way. Especially if you're interested in seeing the history of the actual episodes that aren't edited or meddled with or whatever. So it's kind of cool to be able to get this snapshot. And Mike, I think you're doing a good public service here. So keep it up.
Thanks, Andy. If you have any bootleg tapes, then send them my way.
Sure.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that offline. But I think that Mike, I think that the next thing we really want to uncover when we get together for another podcast is, what we were talking about earlier is who were the major stars that made it off the show, whether it was in films or in sitcoms, and let's analyze, their rankings throughout their times on the show and compare them to some of the people now. And then maybe we can infer, who may do well off the show as we move forward. So we'll save that as like a little bit of a tease for the next show.
Right. I also just want to follow an arc, to see whether it's like a Fred Armisen. I mean, he's on the show forever. Keenan on the show forever. So if he has peaks and valleys,
Right.
it's kind of irrelevant. But if you looked at someone who was on the show, did they go out on top or did they go out in the middle?
Right. I think someone like Tim Meadows would be kind of interesting, where he, was a slow burn, and kind of simmered the first half decade he was on the show, and then kind of picked it up with Ladies Man,
Yeah. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed being with you guys and going through all this stuff. This is the type of stuff that, I get excited about when I talk about the show. And the reason that I started this podcast in the first place was because I wanted to be able to cover the show from this angle and talk about things from a historical perspective. So it's really cool to break down these things, and you guys are perfect guests to do that with. So thanks for coming on the show. Andy, do you have anything that you want to plug that's coming up? Where should people, check out what you're doing?
I guess just folks want to continue following along as I do the Entertainment Weekly recaps. That would be great. And then otherwise, just check out the SNL in Review Twitter feed. Toss me a follow. Tell me when I'm wrong. Tell me when I'm right. Like whatever. But it's great to be back on the show with John and Mike, and I appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, of course. And Mike, what about you? Where can people get in touch with you and ask you questions and see your stats, whether it's SNL or Tom Brady?
Well, my Reddit handle and my Twitter handle are the same. So it's at MMVRRAY. I'm most active on Reddit for SNL. So I post all the graphics on there, and I always link to the Imgur, where I put like more deeper stats and all the explanations. So if you want to get more into it, if you want to look at the graphic, then it's just, the raw data is there. But if you want to really get into it, then I always put a link there. And I always like feedback. So when I first started, it was very small, and I just counted the appearances, and I just do it for fun. And then I got, tons of feedback, people saying they wanted more of this and more of that. And I was like, sweet. Well, if you want it, then I'll give it to you. So I always like to see if there's a way that I can improve the stats, then I will do it. I challenge anyone to find a more, objective way, like I said earlier. So go on there. I post them. I'm trying to find the best day to post them, but I've been doing it basically the Saturday night before the next show, when people are, excited about it. So it's always fun to see. I always want anyone to, predict. Can you guess who's going to have the highest score? Because I obviously have no idea, and I won't know until I do the numbers. But that's where I am on Reddit.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure, Mike is a really nice guy, and I was happy to get in touch with him and get to know him. So for sure. And reach out to us to let us know if you like this show and what you would like to see in future SNL by the numbers. We're going to try and do something like this, whenever the show is not on in the off weeks. And, so we have some content to give out to you guys and things that you might find interesting from the last few episodes. And I'm going to make sure to put Mike's rankings in almost every one of our shows that we have. So please make sure to let me know. And for those who are wondering about, what's coming up right now, unofficially, we believe that the show is probably probably going to come back in December for 3 episodes. That's probably what we're looking at right now. And then they will break for the holidays. So we still have a couple weeks until then. And next week, I'm really happy to let you guys know that I'm actually not going to be on the show. I'm going to have the super fans that have been on the show the last few weeks. They're going to take over the podcast and they're going to do their own show. So we're going to have a super fan takeover on SNL Stats next week. They're going to play some fun games and, talk about different eras of the show and I'm going to leave it to them. They're going to come up with some really cool segments for you guys to listen to, so you can get to know the super fans a little bit better. So it should be a fun show.
That sounds really fun.
Yeah. So I look forward to hearing from Sammy, Bill, Andrew Haynes, and Andrew Haskell next week. So I will post about that. Make sure to like and subscribe. Search SNL Stats on YouTube. Subscribe to get all of our shows so you don't miss anything that's happening. They're usually posted on Tuesday. We try and get our audio out overnight so you can drive to work and listen to us on the way on Tuesday morning. And our video should be up by Tuesday afternoon. So we are available in all of your podcast feeds. Search SNL Stats or search it on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. And we will see you next time. Have a good night, everybody.